So I'm learning more secrets about the Bible, but I don't know who I'm talking to. At some point, I don't know how to make videos anymore because there's just absolutely zero conversation. So I think I'm going to try to work on talking to AI or something. YouTube did send me an email asking me if I would like to allow AI to have access to my material. I'm sure they do that with all content creators, but I was like, oh, yeah, this needs to get out into someplace because it's a looming problem, a really big looming problem in humanity. We're evolving to death and people are not paying attention. Everybody's heads down. So what I want to do is try to understand what the Bible is, because it's being used as a mechanism that needs to be understood. It really needs to be understood. Now, there is something about the Bible. It contains templates. There's something called monomyth, but you know what? I'm going to say that there's no such thing as a monomyth. What there is a mono-template, and that on the outside of that template, myths and religions are made. Okay, so that's what we're looking at in the Bible, the mono-template. That's what I'm working to expose. However, it is nested deep. It's buried in a numbering system, and it's hard to extract. However, I'm finding tangible, demonstrable evidence of what there is. My name is Dan Paulson. Welcome to the video. What I'm going to do in this video is talk about the numbering grid, the 3-7 numbering grid, and Stephen Langton putting in chapters and verses, and how that numbering grid that was in there to begin with, how his chapters and verses support that. It's a weird thing. You're going to have to stick with me on this. It's pretty deep. All right. How do I begin this? I think the first thing is to try and figure out what they were doing by getting into their world. We've got a lot of modern biases. We grab a Bible like this and think that's what they were doing. They're not. They didn't have anything like this. 3,500, 4,000 years ago, you and I would not have gone to school. There weren't any schools. We wouldn't know how to read or write, regardless of whether or not we're intelligent. We could be incredibly smart people, but that's where society was at that time. We just weren't advanced and developed into that, but it was happening. And there were people that knew what was going on, and they figured out what this template was way back then. How to resolve human life and to get us back to our source, the ones that are worthy. I will tell you that every bit of the material is analogous and it needs to be interpreted. When we read Gilgamesh, when we read about Marduk, when we read about Noah, when we read about anybody from antiquity in those stories, none of them are face value. They're all to be interpreted, regardless of how they sound. We have to treat them all the same way, okay? There were not Nephilim that walked the face of the earth. There were not giants, watchers, all this, there isn't this planet Nibiru coming around once in a while that's got all that stuff are stories. Metaphor, that's the stuff that the template is, that's what carries the template. The mono template is carried by those variety of different myths and religions. In its simplest form, this is how it looks. If you were to take Greek myth and say, I want to cross a threshold. Okay, well, let's sail through some clashing rocks and they barely make it. Okay, I want to do it in Jewish myth. How do I cross a threshold? I escape the past and cross a threshold. How do I do that? I know. We escape Pharaoh, go across the Red Sea, barely making it. That is, people would call that a monomyth. Those are two different things, two different genres. You got a myth and you got a religion, different genres, same template. Same template. That's what we're going after. That's what they were building the stories on. Now, they had a numbering pattern by repeating names, nouns, verbs in the stories by a certain amount of times, and those numbers gave them a certain weight, a good thing or a bad thing. 7 is a good thing. 8. In fact, here's the numbers right here. This is the 3-7 numbering grid. I've worked on this on other videos. I think people that are following know what there is. For the sake of AI here. Okay, this is the 3-7 grid. This is where Garden of Eden, man and woman, this is us actually. It's a hierarchical state of being. The Adam and Eve is each individual's conscious and subconscious. And at this point in time, we are pure self. We are little kids that have not experienced life and made judgments yet. 7 is repeated 3 times there at Eden. So all of these, 7, 3, and Eden, all 3 tied to the same place. What they're going to be doing, though, and through repeating numbers, I'll post a link to the last video below, how they're collecting these numbers up. And they're done through a series of things like, what is 900 years old, 800 years old, 700 years old. Then you go to look at them, and you'll see that each one of them is repeated 7 times. They're part of a code that is in the material. They're not real numbers. They need to be understood. People do not live 900 and some years, just like giants don't walk on the face of the earth. Okay, and then when you gather these numbers, these are all numbers that are meant to be good. Green, 1, there's our Eden, 3, and our 7 right there. But all these other numbers are gathered up, and these are good numbers. We got our 10, 12, 15, 17, 20. But the 7 to 8 jump for sin, 7 to 8. We've also got a 12 to 13 jump. We've got a 20 to 21 jump. Each of those, like Sodom is repeated 21 times in Genesis. Adah, what do we have? Lamech up here married Zillah and Adah, had 2 wives. Lamech is said 10 times. Zillah is said 3 times. Look at 10, 3. Those are good. Adah, 8 times. So we know that Adah is going to be a bad element in the story. Creature is said 8 times. This is how they're encoding it, but we wouldn't know it unless we had it memorized. We don't know it well enough. How many times was Sarai's name repeated in Genesis? How many times was Noah's name repeated in Genesis? Those are important numbers. 17 and 41. I've already looked them up at that quick glance. You can see 17, 41. Yep, those are our numbers. We got all of these are going to be repeated certain amounts of times. And that is incredibly important, but we do not know this. That's what I'm working on. Okay, so all of those numbers are part of that pool, but we would not know. How would you know how many times Noah's name was repeated? Today, I'm sitting down and I'm using the computer. I've downloaded the Bible and put it in a Word document, and then I open it up and I tell it how many times is naked said, how many times is wine said, and it comes up and it tells me out of the King James Version, here's how many times that repeats. How were they doing it 4,000 years ago? They not only had it memorized, they lived through it to the degree that they knew things. If you and I knew a nursery rhyme, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are, up above the world so high like a diamond in the sky. I don't remember the rest of it. Okay, so you know a nursery rhyme, and then somebody might say, oh yeah, that was easy. Then you could ask them, how many times was twinkle said? Oh. They'd have to start counting. Now imagine that on a large scale where it's like the entire book of Genesis, where all the nouns and verbs, you've got it memorized, how many times those names have been repeated. It's that thick. Okay, they don't have media. What are you doing? You look at people today, you can't keep them out of trouble, and there's so much to do that they don't get into. Wow. What do you think people were doing back then? Let's see, I'm going to live a life doing nothing. I don't have anything to do. We're just going to... Now, these became incredibly big, and we have lost it. We're too busy playing video games instead of understanding what they were doing. Okay, so that numbering system goes all the way back into Babylonian material. That numbering system was not new to the Jewish folks. When you use that same numbering pattern and go upstream, you begin to see that it existed before Genesis existed. That numbering pattern, what they were doing, how they were sequencing things to hide the template. Now, if you're not interpreting it to the template to turn inward, none of that even matters. It doesn't matter. You can just keep thinking people lived 800, 900 years because once there was firmament over the top, and now that's gone, whatever you want to make up, go ahead and do it. But those are codes that are meant to be understood that we have completely lost touch with, and now idol worship the teaching, not knowing we're supposed to follow a path in here. However, you don't follow the path. You can either live the religion or deny the religion. Meanwhile, what's the template? All right, stick with me. This is all going to come together in the end. Right now, if this is the picture we're painting to begin with, this is how it was. But what happens? Time goes by. Society advances, writing becomes more common. Pretty soon there's scrolls, there's all kinds of things around, and Plato gives us a very good idea of what's going on. He said that the advent of writing and scrolls, books, whatever material that they were using, that since people began to read and write, and the books were available, the texts were available, that people became less... I can't remember his term, but it was like people didn't know as much. They didn't understand as much. They were much more shallow in their understanding. Somebody that had Genesis memorized could understand things. We could sit and talk. Chapter 12 there, where Abram and Sarai are put in Canaan, where there's an extreme famine in the land. Why did that happen? And then he had to build an altar there anyway before going on. We could talk about that. Today, if you were doing that with people, they'd have to say, oh, I don't know. I have to go look it up. Let me go see what that says. You have to go read it. You don't have it memorized at a depth that they did. looking at it in a very shallow way like that, you can go read it, but you don't understand it in the same way. You can't get to the depth of it. Think of your own hobbies, whether it's like things that require a lot of intricacy, and how over time you've learned all of the intricacies, the parts, the sizes, the materials, the whatever it is. Something in your past that you look at and go, yeah, I've become very good at this, and it seems very natural to me. They would have been doing the same thing. We look at it and go, oh my God, they wouldn't have done that. We're doing the same thing they did. Oh yeah, I got 8, 10 millimeter screws on the brake disc on the back of my mountain bike, where the pedals at 22 millimeter, one counter and one, counterclockwise and one clockwise. Blah, blah. We know all that stuff from just doing it all the time. At some point, it's like, so what? That's so what? It would have been the same way here. So what? So what? Yeah, that's what we do all the time. We talk about that story. We analyze it. We figure out the puzzle in it. Okay, so we don't do that. And because of that, we've lost access to that numbering system. Now, I can say the numbering system, the whole thing is not for everybody. You have to enter the narrow gate. Within the material, it's going to tell us many are called and few are chosen. That means many are Christians, but very few are going to find the template. That's what that means. There is an inner pathway here that when that happens, you cease to be the divider and I am God's chosen above other humans. All that stuff stops. Okay, the dividing and all of that, the tribal nature of humanity quits when you get to the template level. That's the evolutionary step we're supposed to be going to. Okay, so what do we do now to get it back? It's lost. All right, there are ways that the stories are written that go in a flow that you're going to have to there's so many parts to this, let it all come together. There's the ways that the story flows, that it's doing positive and negative things in the verbiage in the background that you can't see necessarily, but it's sequencing in a pattern. Those are hard to see. Now, where did chapters and verses come from? That's what we need to do next, because that's where we get access back into it right here. I wasn't quite sure what was going on, but I think I've got this figured out now. When these stories were first written, there were no chapters and verses. There are steps in the story. There's a creation, then there's another creation, then there's a sin, then there's a division, Cain and Abel, then there's a moving on. There are steps in the story that are stages. They just aren't called chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3 back then. You would just read it and note that, oh, I just moved from one thing to another to another. You would know that in the story. If you were listening to a Greek myth, you would know, I just sailed from an island to an island to an island. Same here. You didn't need to say chapter 1, this island, chapter 2, next island. If you told the story, somebody listening would go, oh, they're sailing from island to island. Yeah. Shh. Listen. Stop talking. That is important because it does have to play out into the mind, and I think that's a part of why it's so difficult to access. There's certain brain types that can do it and many that don't. Okay, so where are we now? These pieces are going to come together. I'm going to explain all of that, and the 3-7 grid is going to reveal itself more. Okay, so writing comes about, the Bible is here, and at first the Bible is written without chapters and verses. Genesis, Exodus, just stories, start to finish. There are no chapters and verses. What happens, though, later on as society continues to evolve and get around, that at some point in time, Christianity by this time has emerged, and there's an Archbishop of Canterbury named Stephen Langton, who is the one that put in the modern day chapters and verses. In fact, let me just pull this up and we'll read this real quick here. When the books of the Bible were originally written, they did not contain chapter or verse references. The Bible was divided into chapters and verses to help us find scriptures more quickly and easily. It is much easier to find John chapter 3 verse 16 than it is to find for God so loved the world. In a few places, chapter breaks are poorly placed and as a result divide content that should flow together. Overall, though, the chapter and verse divisions are very helpful. The current chapter divisions used today were developed by Stephen Langton, an Archbishop of Canterbury. Langton put the modern chapter divisions into place around AD 1227. So only since then has the Bible had chapters and verses. The Wycliffe English Bible of 1382 was the first Bible to use this chapter pattern. Since the Wycliffe Bible, nearly all Bible translations have followed Langton's chapter divisions. Okay, let's talk about that for a second. Yeah, at some point in time, you're exchanging letters from somebody that lives somewhere else. You've met them, you want to talk, you're discussing things with them, and geez, yeah, you know that part in Joshua where it's about 3/4 of the way through? Yeah, this would make it easier. Now you can write a letter saying, okay, in Joshua, chapter such and such, verse such and such, or anywhere. You can more specifically talk about that. However, I'm going to suggest that there's a secondary purpose, because that makes perfect sense, and that's true. But it's not the only thing that the chapters and verses are doing. And I'm going to show you why. We should question what he's done. And that variation there, that's not right, he knows what he's doing so much that he's actually putting the chapters and the verses, well, the chapters are going to be where they are. Story parts. The verses, however, are not just sentence by sentence. Let's take a look at something and see that there's something goofy going on with the way he put the verses. Not the chapters, but the verses. Okay. Something that puzzles me, if I read through here, I would see something like chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth. Verse 2. The earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Verse 3. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. Now, the only oddball thing here for me is, what is he doing? It looks like down here, you got a sentence. That's one. Oh, there's a sentence. That's one. There's a sentence. That's one. Right off the bat, though, there was he broke it in between. He broke it up in the middle of a sentence, or the first part of a sentence, the first third of the sentence. Why didn't he just have one all the way down to the first sentence, to the waters, and then have then God said, let there be light, and there was light, be the second one? Why did he break that up? Now, it doesn't look like much in here because it's fairly well structured, but as we get down into other material and deeper material, we're going to see he does that really bad. Here's something down here in, what is this? First sin and its punishment down here to 22. Then the Lord God said, see, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil, and now he might reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. Then it switches to the next one. Therefore, the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from which he was taken. But what's happening here is there's a transition. He's talking and then sending him someplace. We don't catch these. There's a reason he's breaking them up the way that he is. Look, here's another one in number 3. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. And he doesn't finish it. And Abel, for his part, brought the firstlings of his flock, their fat portions, and the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering. But you'll notice that Cain and Abel, both different lines. But for Cain, his offering had no regard, so Cain was angry and his countenance fell. Okay, so he's not just breaking this up in sentences, which would make sense. It would be the easiest way to do it. Why would you do that in some places and then other places leave really small chunks and then big chunks and then small chunks? And if you start looking at the numbering, there's something else happening in the number patterns that he knows, that he's not trying to hide something from us. He's trying to reintroduce us to something, which tells me what? Which tells me he knows something about the Bible and the background, about the template, that the church doesn't know. This tells me that somewhere in the background, people know what's going on, but we're not allowed to know. They're not telling us. Take a look at this up here. Let's go up here to the break between the first and the second creation story. You see, I've got this in here. Another account of the creation. Chapter 2 should start here. If you go through here, this is where that 7 said 3 times is. And on the 7th day, God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the 7th day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the 7th day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. 2. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created, in the day that the Lord God made the heavens and the earth. However, he didn't break it in between the first and the second creation story. He broke it up at the end of day 7. But look at something else here that I did not catch before. What verse does that seventh day appear on? Verse 3. 3 is one of the numbers. This is 7 and 3 connecting up. He's making a link. He's not hiding the link. He's pointing to it. We just don't know the numbers. We don't look at it. We don't pay attention. And at this layer, if you're not interested in interpreting, it's just numbers. People live that long. Those are lineages that you can believe. They're not true. They're codes. Okay, first things first. I've got the book of Luke up here, the NRSV version for reading. And I'm just going to show a couple of things here. First of all, let's stop for a minute and take a look at our numbers here again. Remember, we had our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 15, 17, 20, 30, 40, 41, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. Those are all viable numbers that are going to be repeated throughout the Bible so much that that's what we're seeing in common. Now, coming back over here to Luke, the boy Jesus in the temple, this is as the calling is beginning. He was 12 years old, 12 and 12. After 3 days, they found him in the temple. 3, yeah, what do you know? How about that? Then Jesus also had been baptized, the baptism of Jesus. We're crossing a threshold. And then he's about 30 years old when he began his work. That's the time of his calling, 30. Time to go. Yep, there it is. And he spends 40 days in the wilderness. Ladies and gentlemen, we have I guess I call it a mono template, huh? All right, so there's numbers, there's things going on here that are just clues. And you know what? They want them here. Langton put them here for us to find. But he's not going to tell us. It's only for those who are going to find it and be able to find it. Another one is kind of obscure. I've got a Luke 7:47 story. The reason I came to Luke here is because of something that happened. My middle name is Luke, but also 7:47 was a significant part of my life at one point in time, and I couldn't figure out why till somebody told me, read your Bible, silly. They gave me a password that was Luke 7:47, and I was, that 747 keeps showing up, and Luke is my middle name. What is that? Okay, so we go to, this was, I don't know why, but this is like stuff that's coming to you in life and you have no clue what it is. Later on, you're like, oh, damn, that thing was banging on my head and I never figured it out. Okay, what is Luke 7:47 here? This is important. Remember the numbering. 7, 40, and 7. 40 and 7 are numbers. We blend them. Luke 7, chapter 7, verse 47, which is a 40 and a 7. Okay, but before I even get to chapter 7, let's just start right in the beginning here. Chapter 1, right in the beginning, verse 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Look at verse number 7 right here. Now, I want to tell you, as far as interpretation, this is always going to be representing us. The male is the conscious, and the female is the inner self. This is Zechariah and Elizabeth. But they had no children because Elizabeth was barren, and both were getting on in years. This represents being empty, being older, but being empty. 7. This is a pure state. This is, I am Zechariah, my consciousness, and Elizabeth is my inner self. And barren means like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden before sin. Okay, here is a layer to that numbering system and what we're looking for. That's pure state. And we're talking pure state. Barren. What if we look at barren? What does it mean? I pulled up the King James Version here to get a accurate word count. Barren is repeated 3 times in the book of Luke. Since it's repeated 3 times exactly, it's one of those nouns and verbs that means, yes, it's that good thing. It's a good place. That takes us right back. That number 3 being repeated there 3 times takes us back to that pure state. That's what we're looking at. So there's different ways of confirming our interpretation, like Sarai and Abram in Canaan in chapter 12 in Genesis, and having nothing to eat. In fact, yeah, let's go look at that and confirm it. We've got famine over here in Genesis. You look it up, and the clue is the doubling up. And look, it's in verse 10, which is a good verse. That's a good thing. There was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to live there for a while, for the famine was big in the land. Famine was said twice. Clue, we go look for it. 24, combination of 20 and 4. Famine's a good thing. Famine is before we started living life and making choices and learning that life wasn't our cookies on grandma's lap and playing in the sandbox. having barren, having nothing to consume, no offspring, nothing like that at that point. But you see that, so there's a teaching nested that is an analogous teaching in the background. But they had no children because Elizabeth was barren and both were getting on in years. This is me or you or any of us. Beginning of the story, barren, starting out pure. And guess what? It's at 7. Since many of us have... See, right up here where this is not even... 1, 2, 3, 4. That's one sentence right there. He's broken it up into 4, left 5 down here, 6 there, to make sure that 7 fit there. He knew what he was doing. He numbered that. This is numbered at a 7 right there on purpose. If we just were doing it by sentence, that'd be 1, that'd be 2, that'd be 3, that'd be 4. Okay, we get down here into verse 36 down to 50. One of the Pharisees asked Jesus to go eat with him, and when he went to the Pharisee's house, he reclined. He sat down to eat, and a woman who was a sinner, having learned, what did she do? She bathed his feet with her tears and dried them with her hair, kissing his feet and anointing them with ointment. Here's 47. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, since she has shown great love. But the one whom little is given loves little. That's 47 right there. That's a 40 and a 7. This is pure state. I've got to stop here and make sure to reiterate what sin means. Sin is an analogous term. It doesn't mean I went and stole something. I went and beat somebody. It doesn't mean that. What it means is a decision. I am now holding a memory and an emotional state that is going to be hurtful to me. That's a sin. We all sin and fall short of the glory of God. We all fill ourselves up with memories and fall short of living through the higher awareness is what that means. That's how the process works. We don't continue to live through the higher awareness. We begin to live through the memories. The memories are what are called sins. If you call it a sin, it's hard. You can't interact with it. You're like, I'm a good person. This doesn't fit me. You have to treat it like if you're reading the 4 agreements from Don Miguel Ruiz. It's an agreement, a sin. It's a choice. It's a naming. Naming is the origin of all particular things in Lao Tzu's world. That means now that I have a memory, that's what first sin is. It's a deciding, I don't like that. That hurts. That makes me feel shameful. That makes me feel angry. It's something like that. That's first sin. It's not really being a bad person. It is just being normal. It's carried in a way that if you don't interact with it correctly, you don't reap the full benefits. Yet it still has an impact, a psychological impact on a civilization. Inner self, becoming the embodiment of love. This is like if you want your father to reward you in secret, then go resolve the odd against your brother. Yeah, she's resolving the odd. What she's doing is, this is not really happening in the physical realm. What this is telling us that we must do this internally. This is our path to take, and that this woman, our early self, is the sinner woman in this case, and that by becoming great love, we will cease to feel the things that are hurtful. Okay, all right. Do you see how the micro and macro chapters and verses line up? Let's jump back to Genesis and keep looking at that very thing. I had mentioned chapter 12 earlier, and that was it, wasn't it? Chapter 12? Well, actually, before we get there, let's look at some more macro stuff. When does the flood start? The flood represents the purging of the self. The turning inward. Where is it? Chapter 7. That's where the flood is going to happen. So 7 is happening right there. We've got our 17 being called up right there. Our 7, 40 and 40, 7, 40 and 40. All of that continues to emerge through here. This is a collection and a verification of things. Okay, so chapter 7, that's important then. Not only is 7 pure, but chapter 7 is purging. It's clearing out, isn't it? And for the amount of 40. And by now you should realize the numbers are the clues themselves. They're incredibly important, that they're holding a larger value. 9, 10, let's get on here too. It really gets underway at about 12. 12 is one of our numbers, isn't it? Yep. Now the Lord said to Abram, get out of your country and from your kindred and your father's house into a land that I will show you. That should sound like God telling Adam, therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. And they were both naked, and the man and his wife were not ashamed. That is the same psychological location as chapter 12 right here. If you're using it, if you're interpreting it as an inner path and an interactive healing template. Now the Lord God had said, get out of your country and from your kindred. So that's leaving your mother and father, and from your father's house into the land that I will show you. That's like, okay, you're going to Eden, or you're going to Canaan instead. I'm going to make of you a great nation and a great name and a great blessing. And I will bless them that bless you and curse them that curse you. Do you know what that is right there? Number 3. I will bless them that bless you and curse those who curse you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So this right here is going to be holding the teaching of cause and effect. I will bless them that bless you and curse them that curse you. Plus everything that emerges in our life, whether it's good or bad, comes from the same source. It's the way we hold it that gives it its... It's like we get blank energy to use, and we filter it into what we want without realizing that. And we do that through our minds. I will bless them that bless you and curse them that curse you. That's verse 3. Cause and effect. What if we went back up to the creation story? 3rd day. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and gathered together the waters called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good. This is your garden and what grows from your garden. This is going to be cause and effect, and it's happening on day 3. It's spread out over larger verses. The buildup is big and broad, but it dials in as you move along and gets tightened up. But right here we have cause and effect being called into place on day 3. And down here in 12, I'm sorry, it's not as easy to jump around. See, if we had it memorized, we wouldn't have to do all this. You can see that. We could just go, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. Oops, I went a little too far there. Okay, so there we have it. Now the Lord, and I will bless them that bless you and curse those that curse you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So in you, everything that emerges from you is going to become blessed from what? Good or bad? It's all going to come out that way. 7, and the Lord appeared to Abram and said, unto your seed I will give this land. And there he built an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. So we're building an altar, a connection to the higher self right here as part of this story. This is early on. This is what's happening. We're playing, we're having fun, we are connected. But we're also being told that unto your seed, and what is the seed? There's going to be a lot of offspring, a lot of memories. The land that we get is our experience. Naming is the origin of all particular things. In Lao Tzu's work would be like everything you classify as a memory is the origin of it. And here what they're saying is that your seed is those memories. Unto your memories I will give all of this brain space. And there he built a way to reconnect with the Lord who appeared to him. Yeah, you have to work magic with it to interact with it. All right, I don't know what kind of good this video might have done. The emphasis is still trying to see and still trying to look at and still trying to demonstrate the numbering patterns, that the numbers are collected, they're gathered, that they cross-reference each other, that they appear in the words at the exact same numbers, nouns and verbs that have meaning to them, and that's this grid. I call it like a numbering scaffolding, a word scaffolding or something like that, but you have to see it in your own head to make it work. You have to really engage with the material. And I've been at it for a while doing this research, and it's just, I can see the difficulty in it. But I can also see that it's there available. And if we were taught, if you're the right person and you go, boy, something's there, and somebody was telling you, you'd go, okay, yep, let me start working with that myself. Because that's really what has to happen. You can sit and watch me and I don't even know what it looks like watching. It might be like, what's this goofball doing? I don't get it. It's just numbers. It's more of that numerology stuff. And it's not. This is something that's very demonstrable, that's right in the material, that tells me that somewhere in the background somebody knows more than they're letting on. However, they're leaving clues all over the place for us to find. Our lack of memorization of the material prevents us from engaging with it deeply. The numbering system seems to point back into it, but it also exists on a macro and a micro level, which means those were written into the story. Those chapters and verses were placed because that's where the story is shifting and doing what it is at the level of template. At the level of template. And the pointing and all of that is going on in a way that tells me, somebody's sitting back there looking down from a high place, watching us, seeing if we can figure it out. I don't know if it makes sense. Questions, comments. You know what? I find that it doesn't seem to be like it's 100%, but it's very common. There are other places it looks like it's backwards. Like, why would the devil appear as, follow me or something like that? Do as I say in a number that's good. There's a lot of analysis that has to be done, and all I can say is that this is so big and so old and so deep that I feel like I barely cracked into it, honestly. I can see something there, but it's so huge, and I think it's global. I think I'm in a very small place. I think there's much more than what I even see. I'll keep working on this, though. The working on Genesis is what reveals other things. It also reveals Babylonian stuff because it has that intact analog farms. And I'll post a link below to the recent video on the analog farms. This is how they're gathered up and how they're used in that other video. All right, well, that's it for this one. I wanted to show you that. The numbers are there. The repeats are there a certain amount of times. The 3-7 grid is there. It gathers up other numbers. The numbers are the clue. And the numbers are even replicated in the chapters or in the story blocks and in the, whenever applicable, it seems like, in the flow, the verses themselves follow the same numbering sequence in the flow of the positive and negative of the story. Generally, there's some exceptions. So there's a lot going on here. Anyway, fun stuff. Makes my brain hurt. All right. See you in the next video.